Alrighty. Everyone sign into the document. I don't see any new faces, but let me know if I missed you. Release planning.
I can give an update about the life cycle. We're in pretty good shape, kind of in the territory of writing release notes and doing validation. So hopefully this week.
Cool. And platform just had a release, so I'm guessing there's not much to say. Looking for my platform people.
Yeah, just had a release. I think the only thing of note is that use like old 32-bit machines. One of the Ubuntu releases didn't go out because there's a lot of unsupported stuff on it. So, but other than that, nothing.
Are we doing ARM releases yet for Apple Silicon Macs? Okay, cool.
All right, outstanding RFCs. I'll go ahead and share. All right, to allow setting default command arguments that can be overridden by the user. If Sam's here today, that'd be a good one to bring up. Doesn't look like
I
it.
do not see him or her.
Right. Yeah, take a look. Fixed grammar and markdown and asset cache RFC. Oh, I think this is not an RFC. This is a retroactive pedantic correction of our grammar.
Just merge that. Or I'll tell you what, I'll do
Yeah.
it behind the scenes. I'll just take care of that for you.
Okay, thanks. 146, allow for different build runtime user IDs. Actually, I'm sorry. I think I should have added the labels to this one before I moved on. And I think this is lifecycle implementation.
Someone from the lifecycle team want to volunteer? Oh, implementation, there we go.
What am I looking for? I think it's Buildpacks spec changes to the process table. Does that sound right?
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so coming back to this. Yep, just take a look. Disambiguate layer metadata files from app metadata. Also from Sam. Yep. Process specific working directory.
Let's see, since this one is me. Wow, that's a lot of votes. 3, 4. Emily, it seems like you've still got outstanding questions. Or do you?
Let me look at what they are real quick. We can move on. I'll either approve it or comment on it.
Okay. This one I think is FCP. So I'll do an SCP on it. Any objections to that? Nope, okay. Who actually opened this? Forrest, is that you? Can you do a update that branch when you get a moment, please, Forrest?
Yep.
All right, guidelines for accepting component level contributions. I think this one, I think there was some good chatter. It just needs to go back and forth a bit. Actually, no. I think for the most part, this one. Yeah, I think, Stephen, for me, it was just getting these merged, kind of smaller changes. And then I was gonna approve.
Sounds good. I'll go ahead, or I'll take care of those before next working group.
Cool. Add RC for displaying contributor graph. Is this just still active discussion? It's like sort of its state.
Was last comment was like there's no positive votes, and it seems like the last comment was a week ago. That feels like we're still okay.
Yeah, we talked about, well, no, it was 2 weeks ago. We talked about it in the learning sub-theme sync.
David responded 7 days ago to something.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's been at least some movement in there 9 days ago from Anthony. So I wouldn't consider it stale quite yet.
Cool. All right, issue generation.
I think I'm gonna rework this so that the alternative for using comments is the primary proposal. And I have just some newer ideas on how that would work as well that I'll document on there. And I saw Emily's comment about adding some metadata to the issue titles that'll work in.
Cool. All right, project descriptor domain RFC. It's been open for 22 days, and I think there hasn't really been any, like, I think Terrence updated it to include the underscore, and we discussed it last week, and there hasn't been any movement since. So I think we should really try to get this one merged. Can we put it? No, we only have 2 votes.
I'll approve it right now.
I think, yeah, I think this is blocking some stuff, so it'd be nice to move it forward.
Yeah, I'm approving right now since the latest changes.
Cool, and then if you can move it to FCP, that'd be awesome. Javier. Wait, why does it have 2 assignees?
I don't know what's going on.
I thought I might go back and figure out the history of that, but I'm going to remove David. Just call it you.
I wonder
Javier.
if it's because of its platform, but then project descriptor or something like that.
No, like someone definitely manually added themselves. There's all sorts of code to
Okay.
make sure that it only selects a single person and only off of a subset of those labels, the team labels. So
I believe you.
somewhere in the history is the evidence, but I just can't.
All right, package refactoring.
Yeah. So this is basically just about the pack code base and what it will look like. And there is approval from the 2 maintainers of that code base. So I'm happy to present this here, but I'm wondering how interested in it anyone is.
Feels like an FCP if the core team agrees that it's scoped to a team.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions about it, both throughout prior art and then just curious if there are other examples that use that same kind of layout.
Yeah,
And
so
oh, you might, yeah, you look like you addressed everyone. Yeah.
I can talk about it too for 2 minutes and later on in this meeting if you'd like as well.
Yeah, why don't we throw it on the agenda?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right, adding builder key in project descriptor.
I think this is just my shame or Stevens. I forget which one of us has been in FCP long enough that they can merge.
And be Stevens' shame, but it can't make it out of FCP without issues, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I never got around to approving it, but I don't remember why. I'll take another pass, but it's fine.
Yeah, I think this one just needs issues, right? Before it can move forward. And Joe, if you want to review.
Yeah. And then create Stackify repo, it's FCP. Same thing, just issues.
Yeah, I think the issues have been created unless we're talking about implementation based issues, which I don't think apply to this. Because it's platform, so learning and
Yeah, not on
platform
the-
both have issues. Are we still waiting for implementation team and distribution team to add their labels, or are we kind of scoping it to just the sub team?
For this one?
For
Stackify?
essentially any of them, right? Like there's some other ones that also only apply to platform.
I think, Emily, you've been the most reliable on this. Do you put on the completed or like the issues created tags even for places that just have 0?
Yes, because I think
Okay.
there's a discussion in the original RFC where Javier strongly pushed for the fact that they all must be there, even if it's a no up.
I had forgotten about that, but I'm glad I said it.
It seems like a good idea. Who was the Sherpa for that particular issue? Emily. So it feels like you might want to do that, Emily, and then that'll be it.
Yeah, and then I'm assuming the later part of that, right? Like the follow-up would be getting that repo accepted in. And someone from the core team needs to do that.
Yeah, I think begin the transfer and someone has to approve it. Because I think it's a transfer out behavior. I don't think it holds
Yeah, we
the RFC for it though. The RFC can close before the transfer is done.
The way this RFC was written, it was like a pack create stack feature. I guess there's a Stackify component that gets copied into the stack image. So I'm guessing this repo is the one we're talking about is for that component, or is it for sort of the whole existing implementation of Stackify as a separate binary, and then we'll take it as is and merge it in to pack?
I think all of the above, right? The RFC is encompassing the existence of this component and its repo being part of cloud-native build packs, and then pack leveraging that to enable a new operation. Am I misunderstanding the question?
Yeah, I guess my question was more around the fact that the RFC is sort of focused on a pack use case, and I think had changed such that it wasn't specifically referencing a repo that we were adopting, but rather a new pack feature. I guess adopting a repo is an implementation detail of how we want to start incorporating that feature. I was just clarifying what exactly needs to be done there.
Do we know where this repo is? I know I've seen it before, but I would assume whoever has access to it to give it to us. And then we'll take it from there.
All right, well, I'll let you all figure that out. Should we move on to the agenda items?
Yeah,
Cool.
let's do that. So I guess just answering some of these questions that came up on review. So I think like simply all this is doing is imposing a little bit of additional structure on the pack repo. This is kind of what we have now. This is more what we would like. There's a lot of resources for what a Golang project should look like. I think that there's some recommendations by the core team that they put out, and this fits in with kind of what we've come up with. Or I guess we follow these guidelines. In our proposal, we don't currently follow them. We probably should. That's basically the gist.
And the risk here that the reason this needs to go through RFC in the first place is because this is going to be breaking anybody who uses Pack as a library.
Yeah, and I think it was also have a single place to have multiple people kind of discuss this, right? It wasn't just a discussion board. Like, we have this formal proposal process. We would like to use it for other stuff other than like large total RFCs for the entire project.
I guess my question for the pack team is like what level of feedback and discussion do you want from the broader group? Because, you know, if you ask me to like bike shit about Go package names, I could do that forever and ever, but I don't know if you actually want all of that, or if you just want like a high level, like looks good on the overall plan.
So I'll step in here because I believe I was the one that proposed that we create an RFC for this. I think we wanted to start leaning towards the direction of creating sub-team specific RFCs, something that I know we've discussed in the past. And then, you know, to Dan's point, like we wanted to make sure that the platform maintainers, right, agreed on some sort of vision, since this is like impacting an entire repository of what we're trying to achieve. And there were some ideas that came about through a discussion board that Jesse, you know, brought up. And so we're kind of like, again, kind of leaning into this, like we have a lot of really good ideas and we want to like have a place for us to be able to comment on them and more or less approve them. And we already have that mechanism, which is the RFC, right? So like, I think we're kind of meeting in this middle. So now to answer your question, right, like our hope from like the RFC process on the sub-team side of things is to get it fleshed out. And, you know, I think we've done that. And we're just coming over here to more or less like for the ceremonial purposes of saying like, hey, we want to merge this in as an RFC.
So I think,
go ahead.
I think this one goes a little bit beyond that just because of the potential to impact anyone that's using Pack as a library. Like at that point, it kind of becomes like a project scope concern, or at least like, because we need to do some comms about that. So like, I'm totally in support of like the autonomy of doing this, the team level RFCs, but like, I think I would be concerned if that kind of change just kind of went under the radar, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's why this is a good pilot for that, right? Like we're bringing it up to this audience so that we could more or less cross our T's and dot our I's. You know, to your point, you know, I don't think that that's something that we've considered significantly because, you know, I think a lot of the times we would justify it as they would have to update their dependencies and therefore they'd have to adjust, right? Like it's not like we have a backwards compatibility concept of using Pack as a library. And I don't think that's at least our goal at this point in time. But anyways,
That's an interesting statement, that you don't think that you have a backwards compatibility guarantee there. It would explain certainly why there's no assessment of that anywhere in the RFC that's going to break the people who are using it that way. But like, isn't the fact that your APIs are public your compatibility guarantee?
not necessarily, especially when you're talking about a pre 1.0, right? Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
we definitely try not to ruffle too many feathers, but we're definitely not making any guarantees right now.
Fair, thanks.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we can't do that. I brought it up because you said it was ceremonial, and I just thought it was a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I totally
I
agree with
would,
that.
yeah, I would like to think about what we need to do. Like, I feel like with these kinds of things, it's about expectations and like, where would people expect to be notified about this? I mean, we can do this Slack, email, tweet, that kind of stuff, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know who all is using Pack as a library. And if there's any that aren't a part of this, you know, frequently part of this working group.
I guess if we've made a bunch of breaking changes in the past, which I think is true, we've definitely made some breaking changes in the past, and we intend to make more in the future. I don't know if I would go over the top communicating this particular iteration, but I might do that once we reach a point that's more stable, where we're more comfortable saying like, yeah, you should use Pack as a library, and maybe we'll change a couple things, but you can trust that this is the general architecture.
Cool. And again, going back at poking at Emily's statement, I think we're definitely beyond the point of bike shedding, right? So bigger concerns, you know, of impact and stuff like that, I think are very valid and reasonable.
Yeah, I think like as a result of finalizing this, could we create an issue or something like that on Pack that's like a reminder to make a little bit of noise about it when we do the next release, or the release that includes this? Does that seem like an okay path forward?
Yeah, definitely.
I do wonder, just out of curiosity, whether or not it'd be reasonable to expect that we'll make the entire change in one release. Right, like that would be another thing. Because I guess maybe in my mind, this was like a transitional thing, right? That might happen over a few releases versus like saying, oh, you know, 019 is going to like completely just have a whole refactor, and every PR that you put in between that point in time is just going to have so many merge conflicts. Like that's what I was hoping to avoid. But again, maybe there's a reason why we want to do that.
Yeah, I may have missed some of the discussion, but like Lifecycle's kind of going through the same thing as well, right? Where we've moved packages around, and I don't think we've made any noise about it. There could conceivably be consumers of Lifecycle as a library as well, and we have made no sort of. It's probably more likely they're using Pack, but we've made no sort of announcements about creating additional packages or moving things from one package to another that I'm aware of.
I think I'd like to get a place where we feel more confident about this level of architecture, and then we can make some noise that people should look at it, and then we'll take breaking changes a bit more seriously in the future. I have to say, I think I brought this up in the comments, but the one thing that makes this hard to approve for me is it seems like coming along with the re-architecture is the idea that we're going to break Pack out into multiple CLIs, which seems sort of like a bigger question than what's in here. I know this is like how we would organize multiple CLIs. Maybe it isn't saying that this approval is for breaking Pack into multiple CLIs, but I worry that when we merge this in, it looks like with that piece is a solid plan. I think that's a much bigger question.
Could that be easily remedied by putting like a big bold text on the possible future structure of like this is not solidified. Do not add additional binaries.
I feel like it'd be really easy just to take out the additional commands because it's pretty obvious from the structure where commands would go. I don't know what we get from having them in here, right?
I'd be done with that.
Happy to do that.
I will have a follow-up for something like that as a separate RFC. So that I think we could definitely have that discussion there.
As someone who uses Pack a lot, what the binaries are matters, has a much bigger impact than the structure of the packages.
Yeah, I don't think anything in this is necessarily saying that only downloading build packs would happen. Like pack would call out to fetcher necessarily, right? Like it could be it's a standalone binary that fetches things in addition to pack doing it through the same library interface that fetcher uses. Because I think when we discussed this early on, it was like, if I'm not running pack, but I want to make sure that I download build packs in the very same way, then it pack kind of bundling along a fetcher binary that does that one thing and that one thing only. Without me having to wrap it in my own Go library would be useful. But yeah, I agree. That's a big decision to, having more binaries bundled with pack.
Not saying I don't like them. Like maybe they're great and I'm gonna love it, but I just feel like it's a decision that has a broader impact and we're gonna want to solicit more feedback on.
Cool. Sounds like a good first pass at this, though, is removing the possible future structure and then just focusing on the more shareable pack as a library components.
Yeah, or you could leave the package structure in the possible future structure. I just feel like the new binaries coming in, like, is another bigger question that like doesn't really need explicit answering because we're following this project structure model. So if we ever added a new binary, that's where we'd put them. I think there's no question that needs to be resolved there with an example. Right.
Okay. All right. That's an easy change.
All right, ready to move on to the next item, which is allowing different users during the build process. Is that Sam?
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't in the last meeting when this RFC was discussed. And I tried to put some of the comments in the pull request and the Slack channel, but I think there are two different use cases that I was thinking of when I created this RFC. One is like the permissions of the different files and directories you create during the build process and which users own them. And one is the user that actually is the default user for the runtime image. So although the examples I put in that RFC are for like securing your runtime image by making some of the directories not writable, there are also alternative cases where like the user that's the default user in the run image has some files or other permissions associated with them that come from the stack and not from the build packs. And the idea was to simply allow switching between different users, which is different from like changing the permissions or the owners of the files created during the build process. And this thing that I currently put in the agenda is about the latter, which is during the build process, Docker has this convenient way of letting you use the user instruction, change the user run a command and then change it back to something else. I don't think we have something quite like that in the build pack world, where you can have multiple users um, that are involved in the build process. So again, I don't know if this would fit in with the current. This might be a bigger change than the one that was proposing originally in that RFC, which sort of already works with the two platforms I've tried it in, which is Pack and KPack. But this was more around like, could Buildpacks say that I want to run as a specific user, or could they use something like, so we have like slices for the app directory, which export them into different layers, but could we have like an equivalent sort of representation where you could say these are the file paths and this is the user or the group I want them, I want those directories to be owned by. So during the export process, the lifecycle could change the owners or like accordingly, and the build pack would still run as the build user. So those were like the 2 points that I wanted to cover in this agenda. That's it. Does that make sense?
I definitely agree that they're separate. These could almost be separate RFCs, right? Like getting the layers and application directory into a state where things are created by the correct users, and separately whether or not the runtime user should be different. I'm a little hesitant to I'm not sure if we need to have. So like if you could run build packs as different users, I think we'd want to restrict it so you couldn't run the build pack as a root user, right?
Yeah.
And then is there value in being able to use different users during the build process to create those files or assign different users to different groups of files? And I think the value that occurs to me as well, if you want to create some files, you can't create them as root, right? But you might not want to have access to be able to write to them at runtime. And so that's like 2 users that you might need there. But a feature that lets you use 2 users during the build process, I wonder if really we're saying that there are some files that should be root owned and therefore not writable by the user, or if we could say that there could be a runtime user and a build time user. I don't know if we need to open this up for as much extensibility as like you can have many users and lots of files within the layers directory or app directory can be owned by any number of different users, if that makes sense. So I'm a little hesitant to say that the complexity is worth it, I guess.
I think I'd add the OpenShift scenarios should probably not be forgotten at this point as well, because OpenShift has this tendency by default to run all of the images that it sees as a random user ID with a root group ID. So if you start allowing build packs to customize that user ID, we're still going to need a way when we build an image to specify that user ID can be random at runtime. You see what I mean? The thinking being that if we start allowing build packs to expect that they're going to run as a particular user ID rather than a random user ID, it makes it a lot harder to convert those images so they work in the default OpenShift type environments.
I mean,
That's
they
what I
already
sort
have.
of-
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's what I sort of liked about the original proposal, where it's like 2 different users, but they have to be in the same group. Because in the OpenShift case, that could be the root group. Like I know
Yeah.
Peck already allows you to run the lifecycle and change the group to root to support this use case, and this would kind of just fit in nicely with that. Sorry about the sirens.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing for me is if it's customizable here, that there still has to be a way to override it. But if you're providing a way to override it, of course, you've still got to semantically have some idea if this is going to function if you do override it. Because if the build packs were doing this for a reason, and then you force it to root at build time, then there's a fairly good chance that there will be mistakes made at runtime. And whether you'll discover those when you're messing with root groups is a very different thing.
I feel like if you have a user at runtime and a different one at build time, or maybe the same, like we allow both, but you know they're in the same group, then you can use sort of group permissions as a proxy for runtime permissions, and you'll have all of the ability that you need to
Yeah.
fine tune those.
Agreed.
I do worry about the complexity for build pack authors if they have to manage group permissions separate from user permissions a little bit, but maybe it's more about making that possible as opposed to, you know, like if you just allow configuration of the UID and GID at runtime, then build packs can, set those group permissions up so you could take advantage of that, right? As to how the original thing was proposed.
I think the defaults are pretty good for build pack authors if we do this, even if they're different users. Like most things would be writable by the build time user, but only readable by the group. I mean, depending on what UMask people have in the stack images, right? But I don't think that's a bad default that people would have to learn more to deviate from.
What's the last item on the agenda? Did you want to talk about any of the other RFCs, Sam?
There's another one that I put in yesterday, which was around something we discussed last time, which was overriding default arguments. And I think the main thing I wanted to discuss there were the two options that I proposed. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. So the so the idea is that like both the OCI spec, Docker, and Kubernetes have this idea that you have a list of strings which are like the defaults, which cannot be overridden by a user unless they change the entry point. And then you have a bunch of default arguments which are a hint, but if the user provides some arguments, those are overridden. Currently, that sort of behavior is not possible with Buildpacks because the launcher simply appends any arguments from like Docker run to the current set of arguments. So the idea was that you use so the proposal is that you can still have the existing behavior, which is like command and args, and then anything by the user is appended to these two things. But let's say the user doesn't provide any arguments. There are some additional default arguments which are appended back to like these args. So let's say you have something like this, like echo hello world. If the user doesn't provide it, it would translate to something like this in the existing spec. But let's say the user provides like Docker run entry point high universe, in which case world, which was an additional default argument, would be replaced by universe, and it would translate to echo hello universe. The drawbacks, I guess I didn't put it here, but the drawbacks here are the complexity and the deviation from like existing terminology that people may be familiar with. So command and args, like in at least the Kate's container spec, people expect command to be like a list of strings, which is the entry point, and args is the thing that they can override. Whereas now we have like these three concepts, which is like set the command, which is a single string, args, which is a list of string, which will be appended, and then additional default args, which are which map to like command in the Docker world and arguments in the Gates world. So the alternative that I proposed was to change command to an array or a list of strings, and for args to map directly to like what it maps to in the Gates world, which is a set of default arguments that can be overridden by the user. The possible issues I see with this is that one, it's a backwards incompatible change, and also since it's using existing terminology that Buildpack authors are familiar with, and we are changing the behavior entirely, they might get confused, which is why this was as an alternative. But yeah. I'm not familiar with the background on why, like how this particular keys and values and this behavior came into being, and because like the OCI spec, Docker, and Gates have similar concepts, but I don't think any of them have a concept of appending. So just curious, like what's the history and decision like behind having something like this?
I feel like this all started because in the beginning we didn't support direct processes, and there were no args. There's just command, and command was a bash script that got passed to bash. And then we wanted to like extend this to support other types of processes, and sort of grew that model out from what we had. And because we didn't have, because command was always a single string, and we definitely wanted to support appending, but we had no way to support multiple arguments that got appended to rather than just the one. That's sort of how we ended up in this place, I would say, sort of like evolving the model we had instead of stopping back and rethinking it all the way. So I feel like a rethink of this model might actually do something different with a shell script where you're explicitly saying like, this is a shell script and it's going to get passed to bash rather than sort of reusing the same fields. And then we could refactor command and args to look more like entry point and command in Docker or command and args in Gates. I do see your point about how that's a bit of a jump for Buildpack authors because we'll be using the same fields.
Yeah.
And they would have to relearn new meanings for them. I'm slightly inclined to do it anyways, because I think the way we got to a place where things are kind of weird was by evolving it in such a way that Buildpack authors could, for the most part, leave what they had and it would keep working. But as you pointed out, it left us in an unintuitive place for people who are coming in fresh, right? And I don't necessarily want to recreate that problem with like a third concept that doesn't exist in other systems.
But the other systems don't have a mechanism like this, right? They don't append.
Well, what other systems would do is the arguments that were the ones that you wanted things to append to would be in the entry point. So then if you passed in additional args to be appended to the arguments in the entry point, but they might replace arguments that were in the command. So right now we allow people to just tack more things on the end, but we don't have a way to like take a bunch of arguments and slice it in half and be like, these ones are always there, and you can replace the things, the tail end, with a whole new array of extra arguments, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, the interesting question, like if we move to something where command was an array, would be like when we went to implement this, we want to leave it all in the file and have the launcher do this math and figure it out? Or would we want to do something like actually put the additional arguments and command in the image entry point itself, right? And then it would kind of just happen at launch that it would work that way using the mechanisms, like the set of args you would get would be governed by the way the OCI image works rather than by us recreating it.
But how would you support that for multiple processes?
It really only works for the default process, right? So that's the big downside. Maybe we could put it in there just as like a hint to people so they have some idea what's going on. But then if we're gonna not take it seriously, maybe we shouldn't. I feel like frequently the fact that we support multiple processes leads us to solutions that don't use OCI primitives, like setting launch time environment variables when they're static directly in the OCI environment. And the same thing with like entry point and command, like places where we could do this and where like people know to look for these things to understand how their image works. I think that is sort of a bigger problem in some ways, but I know there's also a lot of use case for multiple processes. So I'm not sure my complaining about that really has a resolution. Been a nice long silence here. Does this mean we're ready to wrap up? Like everyone should go take a look and give Sam some comments on the RFC, or is there anything else we want to discuss synchronously while we're here?
That's the last agenda item.
There was, I believe there were also some comments on that RFC about disambiguating the layer metadata files from the special metadata files. I don't know what the conclusion from that discussion was. Like,
Oh yeah, I put a suggestion that I think we could make that like optional, where like you could use that, like we could basically restrict layer dot, and then you could use that to prefix build or whatever, build.tom or whatever. And that would be backwards compatible and probably a little bit more digestible for anyone that wouldn't need it. It might not be as discoverable or super obvious, but I worry that like it won't be discoverable or super obvious. Anyways,
the only like sort of confusion that may arise from that is that if you have a layer called layer.build, then and you also have a layer called build, then which one, like layer.build.toml points to the layer.build layer or the build layer? Sorry, that's
no, I'm saying we would introduce a restriction that you can't have layer.build as a layer. Well,
I mean,
I think that's the problem
actually,
we're trying to solve, isn't it?
Yeah,
Isn't it, Joe?
I mean, I feel like I think really what we'd be saying is layer dot, like you can't use that prefix, which is like a little bit more I think makes more sense than like, here's a bunch of names you can't use.
Yeah.
Like we've grabbed a namespace sort of. We could also do like a io.buildpacks thing.
I know
Personally,
Steve-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
No, I just want to say that I prefer your alternative, having a subdirectory. I think it will be clearer and we won't have all these problems, and also won't have like weird names like layer.layer.test.whatever.
I like that better if it was day one. In my mind, the big downside is the day you switch from one API to the other, we have to throw out everyone's layers.
No, you can just move the files. Or
We can't reuse layers from the previous image anymore because they got the wrong directories in them.
And their internal path references would change. So if there's an environment variable that,
you're
you know,
right. You're right. But at least you will be able to support both APIs in such way.
It's a
Because,
one-time
right-
thing, the number of images that are currently alive, like, I don't think that's the expense you think it is. It sucks for some particular person on one particular day when they've got to re-expand Java, recompile some dependency, but like as a long-term, like countering a significant long-term improvement, I don't think you should weigh that in.
I swear that anytime anyone has to download a JDK twice, I hear about it. The other thing we'd have to do is this be like a multiple API process, because we would need to introduce some sort of metadata into the image such that we knew that we would have to throw things out in the future on a migration, right? Like right now, we wouldn't actually know which case we were in. So you'd have to put out an API where we actually put the platform API the thing was built with in the image, which is something we should do anyways. And then it would only be on the next one that we could move the directories around. Actually, if it's Buildpack API, maybe it doesn't matter. But because the other Buildpacks can use the things, it gets complicated.
I don't have strong opinions over whether we break caching once, or like I lean towards Ben's like, yeah, it'd be annoying, but it might not be too bad. But I also think we've created this directory called layers directory that we passed to the build pack. And right now they're creating layers in the layers directory. Like creating a layers directory and then making a layers directory in the layers directory for people to create layers because we wanted to use the layers directory for something else feels not great to me. I feel like we should figure out what we want to do with the configuration sort of separately. But that's just my, gut.
I think there was a suggestion to call it the Buildpack workspace instead of the layers directory, the top level one, and then you can have a layers directory inside the Buildpack workspace. But again, that's a significant deviation from current terminology.
Yeah, I think not naming it layers should be on the table. And then anything that comes with that.
So then
I think of it as an output. I think of it as like an output directory. I know like config goes in there, but it's like anything that's the build pack spits out.
So we'd probably want to rename /layers at the root then to something else. And you have a I see a /workspace and /buildpack -workspace.
That one has the same problem. We put stuff in there that aren't about layers.
Yeah, my platform implementation mounts the layers directory as /out. So I think I hit the same conclusion a little while back.
But workspace is also an out. It's just an out that's also an in that changes over time. Right?
I delete.
Are we going to get rid of the?
Yeah, in most of the build packs I'm dealing with, I delete the workspace because it's got all the source code in it. I don't want that stuff persisting through the run. I found it really weird that whole, the workspace automatically getting its own free layer that wasn't part of the layers directory. All that. I kind of imagined it was all going to be consistent in a line, but it wasn't quite that way.
For dynamic applications like pushing a Node.js app, It's a backend app, right? You need the source code in the thing. So it
Oh,
gives you
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, for
place,
sure.
yeah.
They don't have them. But they could clone the parts of the source they wanted to keep. I mean, maybe they got some pre-processing to do that kind of stuff. So
True. At one point, we talked about letting slices say this stuff stays in, this stuff gets cut out automatically, and then it's like you can choose. Do you don't have to remove a whole bunch of files in a persistent directory. You can just be like, yeah, keep this part. That's okay.
yeah, I kind of felt that it would almost be handy if there was just a switch I could apply to Workspace to say just don't include this, because at the end of the day, I'm doing a weirdo find command to delete all the files under that directory, because you can't delete the directory because it's a mount point and it won't let you kill it. So you do what you can.
Once upon the dawn of time, there was a workspace directory, and underneath it, there was the appdir and the layerster. And we changed everything probably too aggressively to be compatible with Knative build, which doesn't exist anymore, and required that the app was in a directory called workspace.
Yeah, I mean, mine's in a directory called /app, and then under that, there's a directory called called content, and under content is the app directory. And I had to go 2 layers deep because at some point the build pack tries to change the permission on the directory that you give it as the app location as the workspace directory. So it wants to change the directory, the permissions on /app/content on mine, which is acceptable. But when it tried to change the permissions on /app, because that was actually the volume mount point, it wasn't allowed, and bad things started happening there. So I ended up having to move everything down a layer to make it work. But anyway, this is all platform implementation weirdness. But it's interesting because some of it bubbles over into stuff, because I noticed that like my run images have the layers directory as /out. So I can identify trivially which images I've built from my platform versus which ones have been built with Pack by just looking at whether they have /layers or whether they have /out at the root, and that's a giveaway.
We should come back to this. I want to clean up these things in the spec, but we're out of time.
True.
See y'all around.
Right on. Thanks all.
Thank you.